Good evening, my lovely people. How are we all doing? Welcome very much to Transform 360 with Susie. This is your girl, Susan the psychologist. Thank you very much for joining me this evening, and I just want to say thank you to all of you for keeping it tuned and keeping it locked. Guess what, guys? We started a very interesting series on parenting, and we covered quite a number of things. If you haven't yet watched the previous sessions, kindly go back and watch them. It is very, very important, like we said, that as we grow ourselves, we grow all of us. We don't want to leave anyone behind, and it is important that we go back, watch the previous episodes, and of course catch up on today's episode. And so previously we looked at parenting. Why is it important for us to be called parents? Why is it a blessing? What does being a parent mean? We were able to look at that, and of course we also looked at dysfunctional patterns of parenting, or rather, what can you consider actually not even dysfunctional, let me correct that. We looked at toxic parenting, and what do you consider toxic? And as parents, are we probably caught up in toxic patterns of parenting? That was quite a session, and it gave us an opportunity just to reflect on how we are parenting as parents, and of course look at ways where we are or areas where we are doing well, and of course areas that we can improve on. We also were able to look at healthy parenting versus dysfunctional parenting. And so if you've not watched those videos, kindly go back, watch them, guys. Subscribe, you guys. You really need to grow this page, because we want our content to reach far and wide. We want many people to grow, many people to be impacted, of course, even just to their lives to be impacted positively as we continue learning together. So kindly make sure you share this content, and make sure you also subscribe. Don't just watch, my people. Motivate me, appreciate the work that we are doing, because indeed this is something that we are called to do, we enjoy doing, and of course when we receive feedback from all of you, it encourages us, it also motivates us to be better. And so today, guess what, we will be doing the last series on parenting. Actually, today is the last session, and yes, it is a good way to wrap up the session and just look at parenting styles. So how do you parent your child, or how do we parent our children? This is very important for us to take note of, because then it will just help us to also be able to regulate the dysfunctional patterns, if any, and of course also help us to know when we are actually crossing the border, because there's a very thin line between healthy parenting versus poor parenting. It's a very thin line, and I know sometimes with all the pressures that we face in life, sometimes you don't even realize yourself crossing that border. And so it's important for us to always be intentional, to always be alert, even as we continue parenting our children. And so today we'll be looking at the parenting styles, and we will of course begin by focusing on 4 parenting styles. First and foremost, we will be looking at authoritarian parenting style. So, are you an authoritarian parent? What does it mean to be an authoritarian parent? An authoritarian parent is one who actually sets very strict rules for their children, and they expect the rules to be followed to the letter. Yes, that is an authoritarian parent for you, and it is always either their way or their highway. What we simply see in an authoritarian parent is the fact that they are the ones calling the shots, and the children have no option but to follow what the parent has actually set out for them. And so failure for the kids to obey or to follow the strict rules that are set, then this attracts punishment. And not just punishment, sometimes the punishment becomes very severe. And remember, we said earlier, there's a very big difference between disciplining and punishing. Yes, there's a very big difference. And so authoritarian parents tend to punish their children. And probably if a child tries to question, why do I have to do this, mommy, or why do I have to do this, daddy, then the answer that follows is, because I said so. Yes, because I said so. You have to obey, you have to follow whatever it is that I say. And I don't have to keep on explaining to you why you have to obey. It's because I said so. That is an authoritarian parent. And so you find that these parents have very high demands for their children, yet they are not responsive to their children. Yes, it is not a two-way thing. It is one-sided most often than not. And so the parent has very high demands for the child, and they provide very little direction in terms of what the child should do or should not do, or what the child should avoid in future, or what they should engage in. And so because they set very high demands for their children, of course they expect their children not to make any errors. That is something that comes with that, being an authoritarian parent. And if you look at it, just if you look around, they tend to be very domineering and dictators. Yes, like I said earlier, they call the shots and the child is supposed to obey without question. So what effect then does this kind of parenting style have on our children? Yes, as much as it results to having obedient children who are very proficient, most often than not you find children who are raised by authoritarian parents tend to suffer low self-esteem. That comes a lot because you realize, of course, with the very high standards that are set for the child, and they probably fail to meet those high standards, then the child tends to feel like they are good for nothing, they're not able to do things correctly, and that really has a negative impact on the child. At the same time, the child also lacks social competence. What we simply mean by this is, even in their day-to-day interactions with other people around them, then they tend to be yes children. And not just yes children, they lack the assertiveness skills. They lack the courage to say no when they need to say no. And they also tend to have a lot of fear and anxiety, because for them, since they're used to, you must do what I say, then even just the thought of saying no tends to come with a lot of fear and anxiety. And so they just tend to fear authority a lot. Those are the kind of kids, before you even finish saying a statement, for instance, you're even a teacher in school, they've already jumped into action. They don't even want to get into bad books with you. And sometimes it's not every time that we have to really, because one thing I've come to learn is, even with adults, you might realize that maturity doesn't come with age. You might find someone who's an elderly person, and probably what they're telling you to do is not right. For instance, maybe someone tells you that they would like to touch you inappropriately. You see, such a child, by virtue of growing in fear and anxiety, they will tend to agree to that. Why? Because they don't know what will happen when they say no, because that is the kind of system they have been brought up in. And so you find even sometimes children might be tempted to lie. Why? Because they fear avoiding punishment. And so if it's a school setup, for instance, or even at home, when you just ask who did this, or probably even they've gone visiting a neighbor, for example, or a family friend, and they get into trouble or end up doing something wrong, if you tend to ask them why they did this or who did this, first and foremost, chances are is they will lie. Why? Because they're fearing if they admit to their mistakes, then hell will break loose. And you can actually see the kind of impact this has on a child. Other than the authoritarian parenting style, which is the first one, the other one is the permissive parent, or the permissive parenting. Now, this kind of parent is somehow opposite of the authoritarian parent. So what this parent does is, they make very few demands of their children, and so they rarely discipline their children. Why? Because for them, they really tend to have very low expectations of their children, or they don't have even a set standard for the child. And so you find the child tends to be more of a friend to the parent. And this is not a bad thing, but what usually happens is, when it comes to a permissive parent or permissive parenting, you start wondering, okay, so who is the parent between the child, or rather, who is the authority figure between the child and the parent? Why? Because the child has gotten to a space where they're so used to having their parent as their friend, and so even if the parent was to tell them to do something, they never take it seriously. Why? Because they tend to view their parent as a friend, which, as much as a parent, you try to be friendly to your child, there needs to be that boundary where they know you are an authority figure in their lives, where they get to know that whatever it is that you require of them to be done, it's important for them to do, where they tend to know when you say something, you obey. And of course, you can ask some questions, which is okay, but there needs to be a difference between a parent and a friend. And so most of the permissive parents, what actually happens is, yes, as much as they're warm and attentive to their children, they prioritize being their children's, or rather their child's friend, rather than being the parent. And those are the instances where sometimes you might even be in a social space and a child is told something by the parent, and the reaction that the parent gets from the child, you're even left wondering, wait, are you the parent, or you're a fellow mate or a fellow peer, if I may say so? So they set very few rules, or rather they set few rules for their children, and then they rarely enforce the rules. Now that is where the problem comes in permissive parenting. They rarely enforce the rules. Yes, the rules are there, but you know what? Even if the child abides to them or not, there's no big deal. After all, see, I'm your friend. So why even obey in the first place? And so children tend to even not probably abide to the rules that are set, because the parents rarely enforce those rules. And then, as much as they're responsive to their children's needs as opposed to the authoritarian parent, they are not demanding. Sometimes as a parent, you get to a place where, or rather at times even as we parent our children, sometimes we have to get to a place where we demand that this needs to be done. Yes, like now, or just this needs to be done. You put your foot down in a firm but gentle way. But you find for the permissive parent, they're not able to do this. And by virtue of they've set very low standards for their children, or very few rules, or they don't even expect so much from the kids, then you find even the children, they're unable to step up to the required level in terms of whatever it is that they're supposed to do. And so these kids, you tend to find that they tend to struggle with even just setting limits for themselves. They tend to struggle with that. They're not able to set limits for themselves. Permissive parents, of course, they're very nurturing and very communicative. That is a positive side of permissive parents. But the only major challenge is, of course, taking the status of a friend rather than that of being a parent. And so this tends to bring up children who, yes, might grow to be independent. But the challenge with this, again, being a permissive parent, is you find children who are poorly self-regulated. And then they tend to also get into problems with authority. They tend to experience lots of problems with authority because they don't understand why you want things to get done. Yet at home, I'm able to get away with not doing things. I'm able to get away with probably mistakes. I'm able to get away with not doing the right things. And so I'm actually used to calling the shots myself. Actually, for a permissive parent, the child is the one who's calling the shots as opposed to the parent. And so when they meet with authority, probably in school, at home, maybe when it's with your house manager, and they're supposed to do some things, you even laid out a schedule of what your child should do from school or after school, they're not able to abide to the rules set for them. And so at the end of the day, automatically, this tends to get them into problems with authority. And now, because even the school system has a lot to do with authority and rules that are put in place, automatically that also tends to affect their performance. They tend to perform poorly in school because anyway, at the end of the day, they're not able to abide to the rules, they're not able to abide to authority, they're not able to even sometimes regulate themselves or just be disciplined. Then that actually brings a problem for them and even impacts on the academics negatively. The third parenting style is the uninvolved, neglectful parent. Now, this one, similarly to the permissive parent, they have very few demands on their children. But now, the challenge and the greatest problem that an uninvolved or a neglectful parent faces is the fact that they are not responsive to their children's needs. And so there's low responsiveness to the child's needs. And This then, of course, comes also with very little or no communication. You find neglectful parents tend to fulfill probably just meeting the basic needs of the child. But remember, we said it's not just about meeting the basic needs, the food, shelter, clothing, education. Children actually have a lot of psychological and emotional needs that also need to be attended to by the parent. And so for the neglectful parent, they are unable to meet this. They're unable to fulfill this. The child actually grows in an environment where there is very little support or very little or no guidance. There is very little support. There is no structure. There are no rules. And remember, as children, of course, when they're young, they need a bit of structure. They need a bit of guidance. They need, of course, some form of rules, because they just help to place a sense of, or put a sense of organization and order. And children actually tend to respond very well to organization, structure, order. And so you find for a neglectful parent, there's no guidance, there's no support, there are no structures, there are no rules. And so the child just lives in an environment where, you know what, whatever happens. At the end of the day, we have no control. Now, neglectful parents also tend to reject or neglect the needs of their children. Of course, we've said it's not just the basic needs, the physical needs. We also need to get the emotional needs, psychological needs, spiritual needs, social needs met. And so a neglectful parent is not able to do this. Then automatically, this of course has quite some negative impact on the child's life. And this basically contributes to things like lack of self-control. A child raised by a neglectful parent might end up not developing self-control. At the same time, they also get to suffer low self-esteem, because remember, we said the nurturing support that the parent provides to their child, even just responding to the child's needs, tends to dictate how they interact with their social surrounding and with the world. It contributes so much to the kind of view that they have concerning the world. So if a child is neglected, they end up growing knowing that the world is a very cruel place. People are cruel. The world is not a place of love. And you find children like this also tend to lag behind. They tend to be less competent than their peers. There are chances of them even suffering from depression, experiencing worse social relationships. Why? Because as a parent, even there's no that connection with your child, and so automatically this impacts on also how they tend to interact with the world. And that is exactly how they will relate. If there's no love at home, if my needs are not attended to, chances are that is exactly what they'll also extend to the outside world and even to their social circles. They also experience difficulties in controlling their emotions. Like we said, of course, they lack self-control, and they experience lots of anxiety, because you can imagine growing in an environment where you don't know what will happen tomorrow. Things are left to chance. That really comes with a lot of anxiety. Now, last but not least, it is the authoritative parenting. Now, this is actually the ideal, and I would say the kind of parenting style that is good for children. Why? Because this kind of parent is very reasonable, and they are just and fair. What actually happens with an authoritative parent? They are able to meet and respond to the child's needs. They are able to communicate with the child, and of course there's an open channel of communication, so the child is also able to approach the parent in a very open and honest way, and they can have that dialogue. And then you also get to realize that there's also some sort of structure and order. Yes, they're firm parents, firm in a gentle way. And even when probably children find themselves at a place where they would like to understand why mom needs this to be done or dad needs this to be done, then you realize that authoritative parents are actually very good, because they're able to explain to a child. They're able to help the child see why this is important, why you need to do things this way, why next time you should not engage in such behavior. They're able to explain to the child, and so that way a child develops even better. They're able to know, for instance, why is drug and substance abuse not good? What are the pros? What are the cons? How can I avoid getting into such traps? They're able to understand all these things because the parent is able to have a very great open channel of communication. They're able to communicate with the child, carry them through, take them through the process, and just help them become better human beings. And so the child is able to understand, and they're able to know what they can engage in, what they cannot engage in, and why. Because remember, for a child, the why factor is usually very, very important. Always help your children understand the why. Why shouldn't I do this? Why do I need to do this? It is key, because even in future, when they're faced with similar circumstances, they're able to refer back to the teachings that you gave them, to the direction, to the guidance, and they're able to make very well-informed decisions. Children also are able to internalize, of course, like I said, they're able to internalize the lessons that they pick along the way, whatever it is that they're learning from their parents, because the parent is able to take them through why this is important and why this is not important, why things need to be done in this manner, why you should not do things this way, why this is bad, why this is good. And that is a big strength of the authoritative parent. They are also able to administer discipline as opposed to punishment. So you find, even if a child does something wrong, and of course probably they had been taken through just understanding why this is important, why this is not important, or why next time you should not do this, or why next time if you do this I will actually punish you, then you get to realize, an authoritative parent, because of having explained that to the child, and the child is able to understand. So next time if I engage in such behavior, for instance, mom will punish me because of 1, 2, 3, 4. And so they tend to administer discipline. They discipline the child in a loving way. The child is able to understand, my mom has disciplined me because I engaged in 1, 2, 3, 4, which was not right, as opposed to the punishing. And they don't have problem even just conforming to rules, because they understand why the rules exist, and they get to understand that this is fair, this is acceptable, this is what I need to do, this is how I should carry myself, and becomes very easy for the child as they grow. And even for the child, they're able also to strive to obey and to abide to the rules that are set. And so you get to realize that these children grow in a very healthy manner. They grow to be very confident children. They grow to be independent as well. They grow to develop the necessary skills that they need for life. Assertiveness skills, decision-making skills. They're able to develop problem-solving skills. They're able to acquire very good even communication skills, because that is exactly what the parents tend to model for them, and this is inculcated in them from a very tender age. Also, these children have no problems with authority. Why? Because they understand why I need to do this, why this is important. They also tend to interact fairly well with people around them, with their surrounding. And so with this said and done, the 4 parenting styles, again I will just mention them in passing. We have the authoritarian, we have the permissive, we have the neglectful parent, and again of course we have the authoritative parent. And so with that said and done, I believe we are able to know what kind of a parent should we aspire to be, and the kind of impact it also has on our children. And remember, we said actually that parenting has quite a lot of impact on the child's life. Remember, we said something to do with it impacts on their emotional, their psychological. That plays a very big role on their mental health. And of course, also just developing the necessary life skills that they need. Parenting is what contributes to that. At the same time, they're able to also form meaningful social relationships based on what they experience at home. So all these things are important. And remember, it also goes a long way even in their academics, their schoolwork. They're able to perform well when we provide healthy parenting and a very healthy environment at home. Again, other than that, remember, last but not least, is even children, this impacts on their security. Like for instance, the authoritative parenting style, you get to realize that even such children, when they get into relationships, they tend to even know how to carry themselves. They tend to detect and also know when probably the relationship is turning out to be toxic. Why? Because you raised them and you gave them the best of what they needed. They're able to be assertive. They're able to say no if they feel something is going against their values, their belief system. If they feel probably someone is stepping on their toes, they're able to stand up for themselves, defend themselves, because it's not every time that you're going to have your child with you. And so this goes a long, long way. And so I hope as parents we've been able to learn something. And like I said earlier, yes, we congratulate ourselves where we are performing well, where we are doing our best, we congratulate ourselves and give ourselves a pat on the shoulder, and whatever it is that we need to improve on, we also get to work on it and become better and better, because that is the whole essence of this channel, Transform 360 with Susie. We aspire to grow, to develop, to become better, and at the end of the day, find a good balance in all areas of life. Thank you very much for joining me, and guys, please subscribe, please subscribe, please subscribe, even as you share this information and even as we continue building each other. Thank you very much for joining me this evening, and have a lovely one wherever it is that you're watching from. Goodbye, and see you in the next session.